Yo,
Hey.
hey, how's it going? I just need to mute your stream real quick. Sorry, I have a. I just fucked up my whole camera. I was trying to get an alternate camera on, but we can just talk.
Okay.
So, did you want to start? Or did you want me to say something? Or
Uh, Depends where this conversation's going. I was looking forward to a riveting conversation about white genocide, so
okay.
who
Well,
knows?
you want to just go right into that?
Well, I don't really know. I find it really difficult to know what kind of conversation I'm getting into with you because first I
Mm.
was a white genocide theorist, and then in DMs you were really polite, and actually that was maybe an overstep. But then I was flicking through your stream, reacting to me, and then I was a white genocide theorist again. So I don't know.
Okay. Yeah.
I don't want to be
If I
sensitive or
can,
anything, but
yeah, if I may clarify,
hmm.
um, so I can bring up the clip if you like, and we can just listen to it. I mean, it is a bit of conjecture on my part, but you did bring up the genocide word in
Hmm.
relation to someone who was being anti-white at the time, if we're to believe who she was debating.
Yeah. So, do you want my position?
Yeah, sure. I mean, yeah, we can just talk it
I
out
think
or whatever you want to do.
this will be relevant to the conversation probably. So, my
Okay.
experience with the topic of whether it's decolonization or land back or right of return is usually when I look at it in articles or proposals, I see a lot of people who are very insistent, probably because they've heard so much panic around what they're arguing for, that they feel like they have to insist basically that we're not going to treat like these issues as a zero sum game, you know, like right of return doesn't need to mean evictions in Israel. There's quite a lot of empty space left over still from 1948, or
Mm,
whether it's like South Africa. I mean, that's probably a bit more contentious, but even though I suppose from the 90s until quite recently, it was all peace, reconciliation, nation building, constitution that protected property rights. When it comes to Native Americans, there's definitely lots of insistence that they don't want to evict people, et cetera, et cetera. But when I
yeah.
get online, when I look away from the more serious proposals, I see a lot of two things. One is I see lots of fuck yeah, stolen land, invade them, who gives a shit? And then I see the second
Mm,
thing, which is the more Weasley kind of a confusing thing, which is like, we don't really want evictions and ethnic cleansings and all that shit, but if they choose they want to do it, they can go ahead. You know, if colonized people want to live free of their colonizers, and the
mm.
colonizers say no, what's the logical conclusion there, right? And I just find that it's kind of confusing when there seems to be a bit of a dissonance between what I see being proposed seriously and what I see the rhetoric being online.
Yeah, I do remember a comment that they who shall not be named yet maybe
Hmm.
said something along the lines the colonized should have the self-determination to do what to decide what they want to do with the colonizers. And so self-determination, that's in my opinion self-determination and not any kind of out-group determination. And so I thought that was a bit of a misreading of one article from the United Nations Declaration of Rights of Indigenous Peoples. So yeah, of course, when we say indigenous people have the right to self-determination, be that indigenous South Africans, indigenous Americans, for that matter, the people who practice the right to return to Israel and Palestine, their self-determination presumably does not extend to another group. And so that's one comment. There's a
Do you mind
couple
if I
other things
ask
you
you
just
about that?
mentioned. Yeah. Yeah, sure.
Um, Self-determination, as far as I know, usually refers to like a nation, right? Like a nation's right to self-determination, or like a group of
Mm,
people that would have the right to vote for things and to legislate and things like that. So I think people do imagine that self-determination could relate to other groups as well, because if it's the self-determination of a majority group that wants to infringe upon the rights of a minority group, then like I mean statistical minority, then yeah, that
mm.
of course that you could that happens all the time. Like Americans have self-determination, and they use that determination to vote for parties that legislate against the rights of trans people. You know, like um,
Yeah, and I'm quite sympathetic to this as I'm white, but I'm also a Native American, and I'm a citizen of a tribe.
Mhm.
And so when people they'll talk about the most amount of happiness for the most amount of people, but then when you have a minority population, like do they just get outvoted by the majority? And we hear this come up with in South Africa, where you know the majority of people in South Africa are Africans in the traditional sense. The settlers are a minority population in South Africa,
Mhm.
and so obviously, in my opinion, it becomes a different conversation when we're talking about minority rights for like. I mean, it's just uh, that is to say, there is an important recognition that goes along with minority demographics and democracy, and I don't think any majority population should, uh, you know, abuse or exploit its majority status to marginalize any minority. Even if that, I mean, if we just want to talk about South Africa, I would extend that to the descendants of or like not even just the descendants, the people, the lack of better terms, the minority white population of South Africa.
Yeah, because in a word, you could say that self-determination, which I guess you could say is synonymous with sovereignty in this case in a lot of ways. Like self-determination is conditional, right? Like I'm sure if any like oppressed minority decided they want to use their self-determination to like kill all the gays for whatever reason, then you could probably say like,
Mm.
probably shouldn't do that. But yeah, is that kind of like, do you think that's a fair statement that self-determination and sovereignty is conditional?
Um, it is conditional. As far as self determination, so something that comes to mind is the McGirt versus Oklahoma case. And you might be familiar with this. Basically, the headline was that half of Oklahoma becomes uh, reserve land for like the indigenous people. But the indigenous people themselves, the federally recognized tribes, are uh, they're tertiary, in my opinion, to the Department of the Interior. I mean, they're under the Department of the Interior, the Bureau of Indian Affairs, and so ultimately, authority is under the federal government in that circumstance. So when people are worried about, well, are they going to kick out? Are the Native Americans going to be able to do this and that to half of Oklahomans?
Mm-hmm.
No, because they're under ultimately the jurisdiction of the federal government.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so and as far as yeah, so like having yeah some kind of like unique power of a minority population to marginalize the majority. That's what came to mind because like yeah, there were people who were saying like, well, what happens to someone named Jeff hypothetically in Oklahoma? What is he gonna do? Move? And it's like no, obviously people can live on Indian reserve land.
Mm-hmm. So that would make me wonder where the big contention is, though, because that's kind of like basically my position is that like, as far as I mean, I don't really know details on every specific country, but on the ones I do know a bit about, I think things like right of return and decolonization, all that are like very like good things. It's just I I tend to disagree when it comes to yeah evictions, deportations, things like that. So I mean, if you seem to be making the same point.
Yeah, I guess it becomes obviously more complicated when we take it to like Israel Palestine because there's right of return for one group of people, but then for the other group of people, that right of return is somehow more problematic.
Um, so I guess you mean there's right of return for Jews, but not for Palestinians, or Israelis, but not for
Yeah.
Palestinians, right? Yeah, yeah, and I think it's and I think Israel, like the states, like they'll have all kinds of like practical gesturing, but like the only reason the state of Israel rejects right of return is because of racism, right? They want to live in a country with as few Palestinians as possible. The problem again, like I run into there, is that like um, I don't know. As far as every kind of reasonable propositions I've read on right of return, because there are like 5 or 6 different versions of it, is basically
Mm.
that you need to start by getting the state of Israel to recognize it. Like, because that's like, I think if you look at
Mm.
polling, the Palestinians like top priorities right now are end the occupation and right of return. Those are the two top things that they want, like immediately. Which I don't think you're going to get like later than you're not going to get either of those things like more, how can I say, you're not going to get either of those things more slowly than abolishing the entire state of Israel. So what you need for right of return to even think about start negotiating it and actioning it is to get recognition of it from Israel, like recognize the right of return. And then we can start to look at like, there are lots of like really detailed maps of all the villages that were cleared during the Nakba that just no one lives in anymore. They're just empty space. Do you disagree with any of that?
So as far as like, if the right of return and like or as far as like these things being associated with like only being practicable upon the end of the state of Israel, I'm not so sure. I've heard someone say like a Palestinian American, they like in as few terms as possible said, what we're advocating for is a one-state solution, not called Israel.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, there's a million things that could go into that. But yeah, honestly, I don't know too much about Palestine, Israel, but I did see that in the Golan Heights, apparently there's a Trump Heights, and there's a sign up there. And so I guess one of those settlements is going to be Trump Heights. So that's interesting.
Yeah, the Golan Heights is a big, God damn it. Yeah, that's a whole extra layer of fuck up. But yeah, but you see, this is the problem that I run into because I feel like I don't think it should be controversial to say that right of return like should be. I think Israel needs to get pushed into it. Like, you can't just be like, here's the propositions. They make lots of sense. How could you say no? Like, there's going to need to be sanctions, and there's going to need to be boycotts and divestments, and like lots of pressure to actually like force the hand, especially given how right wing their government and population is. But like, realistically, you're not going to force that hand at all if right of return is going to mean evictions for Israelis, right?
I
like
mean,
my only real
that's hard to
contention is
say.
that.
I mean, as far as boycotts, divestments, and sanctions, like the BDS strategy, I mean, that seems like a decent, if not perfect, strategy for just like a sort of pragmatic position for someone to take. But as far as getting the right of return to Palestinians without evicting settlements, is that what you mean?
Well,
like
settlements. So when you mean evictions, do you mean in what is now the state of Israel, like within Israel's borders, or do you mean in the West Bank, like? Because these are like very different things, right?
Yes, they are. I guess, and again, I don't know too much about this, but as far as like the ideal of a one-state solution that isn't called Israel, ideally, these settlements would no longer be categorized as either this group or that group, and hopefully, I mean, maybe become integrated. I don't know. It's once you are in segregation, removing the vestige of segregation is troublesome. The United States is 70 years past Brown v. Board, 70 years past supposed integration of their public schools, and many school districts remain more segregated than their cities' boundaries themselves are. And so as far as like what would happen to settlements under a one-state solution, I mean, I think the distinction between what is outside and what is within Israel would stop because it would be like one state for both. But yeah, it's hard to say.
Yeah, but I'm assuming that one state solution is probably the kind of thing that comes, after end the occupation and recognize right of return, right? Like I can't really imagine a world where right of return, where one state solution comes before Israel ends an occupation or recognizes right of return, unless you're planning on like invading the country. I don't know. But at least as far as what I've read, I don't know. So there's a difference here. Like when you talk about ending the occupation, that would mean that the settlements in the West Bank would no longer be defended by the IDF, and that kind of means, so when Israel, it'd be like when Israel pulled out of Gaza. When Israel pulled out of Gaza, the IDF had to evict like 10,000 settlers and bring them back into Israel. There are about 500,000 settlers, maybe even more, in the West Bank right now. That it's going to be a bit harder. I don't know if it's, I don't think it's impossible, but I'll tell you what, I'm going to send you a map.
Okay.
If you look at that link in your Discord.
Okay. Yeah,
So
and
as far as
like,
settlements in the West Bank go, like if the occupation ends, that's going to be a big question about what happens to them, because I imagine probably a lot of people in those settlements won't want to live in the West Bank if the state of Israel is no longer there, and they probably want to leave anyway. It's probably in the state of Israel's interest to pull people out as well, and that can be their problem, I guess. But depends on how recently it was done as well, because there are still intertwined communities that exist all over Israel and Palestine. So. But yeah, see, if you can tell me when you've skipped to the end of that little visual.
Okay, I just opened up in stream. As far as like assuming that these other things can't happen until like one state solution can't happen until these other things happen. I mean, I have no idea, but we can go with that for a second. But ideally, I would say, or going away from that for a second, I would say that, of course, the IDF would cease to be representing Israel and would instead represent the one state. But if that can't happen, it's hard to say. But I'll go and start this.
You can just skip to the end because it's like it's only and then if you kind of like scroll out, wait till you can see all the dots.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, you see the yellow, green, red.
Okay, yeah.
So, in summary, the red dots are the ones that were cleared by Israel during the Nakba. And so their Palestinians used to live there, now they don't. And now Israel's built over it and moved Jews into there. The green ones are the villages that stayed the same. And the yellow ones, that big wash of yellow all the way from the south through the west up until the north, those are villages that were cleared during the Nakba that were abandoned. Like they're empty. Like, this is a kind of thing that you see in every country in the world almost, that there is so much space, like so much land that hasn't been built on and isn't used for anything. Like, if you're talking about, like, so that's why, like, I just don't know why people are so quick to, like, insist on, like, the right to evict when it just seems so unnecessary, when you've got all this, like, when you have this much opportunity to pursue a solution that doesn't potentially end with like a massive war,
Yeah, as far as I can tell, I mean, there's places that are extremely densely populated. Of course, I mean, well, this just comes to mind. Hong Kong is very densely populated. Presumably, there's room in the land that is currently Israel-Palestine for all people living there peacefully, if they work together well enough. And I would argue that if housing or dense I would argue that, this land could maybe even accommodate the right of return for both Israelis and Palestinians. But interestingly enough, some people say there's no room, but I would say if they could make enough room with to be that densely populated, it's been done in other areas. So
and it's also the case that like you're also going to have the thing of like, for whether for better or worse, lots of Palestinians who left since 1948 have either moved on or they've like managed to build a life somewhere else for themselves. There's some contention about whether like, I don't know, when you look at polling, it's a bit mixed. Like sometimes you see like a lot of eagerness for people to move back. Like a lot of people who left there, who were kicked out during the Nakba, like they still have the keys to their houses, since 1948. The houses don't exist anymore, but or like you'll see other polls that kind of say like, if right of return was offered to Israel because there's been so much bad blood, like they don't want to go there anyway. And then there's the same thing with like Jews are starting to like around the world are maybe a bit more disillusioned with the idea of Israel, especially since that it's on its way to becoming a pariah state. That, Berlin is ironically very popular for Jews to move to now, and then other parts of the world. So, but this is the point, is like that no space thing is like, right of return is going to be slow, however you do it, because it's 7 million
Yes.
people. That's the problem I get when people say there's no space, though, because I feel like people who say evictions are kind of suggesting no space as well. Like it's because they're both, it's two sides of the same coin to me, which is why it's kind of frustrating. Unless you're talking about like one state solution primarily, then like I don't really know how you would achieve that other than like just waiting until Israel basically continues expanding until there's no more Palestine, and then the only other option is that Israel becomes like a full-on apartheid state, and Palestinians just have to fight for equal rights, and then they overturn it that way by being an ethnic majority, like, which sounds kind of messy. So I don't
Yeah,
know,
I
like
mean the
when people
easiest.
say like
Yeah.
one state solution, I don't really know how they plan to get that. It seems like every account I've read on advocating for it seems like it's a very long road with a lot of steps in between, you know?
Yeah, I mean, if we could go as far as to say that prior to integration in the United States, the U.S. was an apartheid state. After it did integrate, 70 years later, we're still working to fix that initial segregation.
Mhm.
And when it comes to more democratically, it might initially seem that, well, actually, we give a state to the Palestinians, they have full democratic representation. We give a state to Israelis, they have full democratic representation. And then somehow neither group becomes marginalized. But of course, they're still more or less geographically living together. So, of course, after integration, that brings its own issues and its own struggles to actually achieve that. But yeah, 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 I know there's some groups that, I mean, obviously the majority of nations in the UN recognize Israel as a state, but then
Mhm.
some don't, and then obviously the majority of the countries in the UN don't. I mean, as far as I know, the U.S. doesn't, or some don't recognize Palestine as a state, but then some countries do,
Mhm.
and um, yeah, I mean, I don't think so say somehow one state's like overnight, and of course, like we've already brought up, this overnight like return, it like the rate of return is slow, it's not overnight, and similarly I would say, probably the one state solution thing is slow and not overnight, but a new constitution is more or less drafted and enacted and then dealt with at a very central and small point of time once that's actually decided upon. And I mean, it'll I mean, messy is a good way to say what would happen after that. But I mean, this is sort of the same reason that people, well, maybe a similar thing, people talk about how countries, instead of the US occupying them and trying to continue the state that was there, let them go to civil war. It's very bad, but it's all the people there deciding on what will happen after this war is over. Um, it's obviously, war is very messy, but is the U.S. trying to force some kind of continuation of a failed state or something that
Mhm.
that might be? I mean, that has its own issues as well.
Yeah, I do find that conversation interesting. Um, the problem is that we're talking like so far down the road and such a radical like reshaping borders and dissolving borders. I don't know, like especially basically going back to a border that was ultimately created by the British, like the border between, I don't know if you've ever been
Mm,
to anywhere like around Palestine. Like I've been to the Upper
no.
Galilee, which is
Mm,
southern Lebanon. There, like there's the idea of a border being there is like the most irrational thing. It just looks like if it weren't for all the troops and fucking fences and shit, you wouldn't think there's a border. Like it's just completely random. It's just when we get to
yeah.
these kind of discussions of like partition plans and like what would the rest of the world do around these borders, like I don't know, it feels like almost like just like another kind of, I don't want to say imperialism, but like it just makes me feel like I'm just like one of those English bastards like drawing fucking little lines on a map saying, oh, I think it'll go
Mm,
well to do this, but which is why I think it's maybe better to just follow like, listen to what Palestinians want. And it seems to be the case from polling that I've seen is like their most urgent need right now is they want the occupation to end, obviously, and the second one is to get Israel to recognize right for return, which is a huge job in itself, right? Like Israel is so fucking right wing right now. They know that they've basically kind of put themselves in this position where the settlements in West Bank are so embedded that like withdrawal is going to be such a massive ask. And it's like, if we're just sitting here as like streamers and like, I don't know, students and people like on their computers, like a BDS campaign that just says like, you know, this is an illegal occupation, like stop it. Like that's already like insanely ambitious. And I don't really
I think
think
the
the
right
conversation should really go much further
yeah.
from there, to be honest, like as far as practicality goes.
Yeah, I mean, personally speaking, in my American ignorance, I think Israel recognizing the right to return for Palestinians would be a huge step forward, and I can only really give my sympathies to more like long-term idealistic like realities for that area. I really don't know. I mean, it's as far as like, I mean, the West's influence in that area is already, I mean, like you mentioned, British Palestine, it's like was that, and now it's not. And obviously, Israel has many relations with different countries around the world. Palestine has many relations with different countries around the world, and the influence is there. But I understand what you're saying as far as like we're trying to play the Civ game and like uh, play all the right cards so that the best utilitarian outcome happens. But I mean, as far as looking at shorter, more achievable goals that move us in the right direction, I think, yeah, I mean, that's more tenable than speaking of way down the road ideals. But at the same time, I do not want to discount people that will speak of ideals in the future. If I'm going to say land back as an indigenous person, of course, I recognize that won't happen overnight. I know that means 1,000 different things. But that's my right as an indigenous person to say, this is the ideal in my mind or my consciousness, and I want it. I want to immediately. I mean, I think both the ideal and the practical can be the same.
Yeah.
Not the same, but like held simultaneously.
Oh, I agree. Like, I would still call myself a one statist, state of Palestine, not Israel. But yeah. But you kind of highlighted the whole point there, though, is that Israel Palestine is still in Western countries, and unfortunately, what Western countries decide, say, and do matters a lot in this. And opinion in Western countries is pretty cleaved. Although, one point of optimism, I think this is the first point in history. I think this happened just like last year, but for the first time ever, more Democrats supported Palestine than Israel. So Palestinian cause is now more favorable among Democrat voters than Israel. That's never happened before. Think what's going to be like 5-10 years down the line. But keeping that support, I think, ending occupation and recognizing right for return is like very like it's especially ending the occupation. Like there's no confusion there, right? Like no one's it takes quite a lot to defend an illegal occupation. Like it takes a pretty special kind of person to try and defend that. Whereas if you go out there like shaming your fellow activists because, and I've seen this happen, is having fellow activists at like a university campaign who is just like a kind of like liberal two-statist like milquetoast getting basically shamed out of the movement because they failed the purity test, even though they were willing to put in their muscles and their brains to try and help towards advocating to end the occupation, which is really, really sad. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not super. So you're saying that so you're saying that more hyper left, whatever, puritanical kind of people say their idea of the one state solution, and they use that to exclude more pragmatic two-staters. Is that what you mean?
I don't actually think I don't really describe two-staters as more pragmatic. I feel like the two-state solution has been very slowly dying for the last 20 years. It's still
Oh, okay.
it's still I don't know, it's not impossible.
But you mean
like
more moderate positions in the Democratic
yeah.
Party?
Like
Are,
I think I think that kind of shaming that like unfortunately does happen in real life politics as well. It's not just an online thing. And yeah, that level of like purity testing and all. I think it's fucking cancer. It needs to go. It's like it's so useless. I don't think anyone who actually does that really cares about Palestinians as well, because the only way anything happens, unfortunately, because of the way the world is that you kind of need America to stop supporting Israel. And a majority of Americans supporting the end of the occupation, or at least Democrats, that's it's not impossible. Whereas a majority of Americans supporting a one-state solution and abolishing the state of Israel is a little bit further down the line, you know?
Yeah, I mean, personally speaking, as an American, you know, there are times. I mean, of course, we have international issues that we contend with, but as far as working towards solutions, you know, it's not my place to. It's my rather it is my place to work with my fellow Americans on what is practicable in our consciousness, rather than trying to impose some kind of idealistic, like, peace or whatever between people halfway across the world. I mean, obviously, with America being one of the biggest supporters of Israel, Americans realizing a lot of money goes there, a lot of infrastructure and spending and military and stuff goes there. It is between me and my fellow Americans how we choose to somehow deal with our responsibility and the power dynamics that are currently over there. And so that that's how I would see it. Similar, like, and where I'm getting this idea from is like I've heard random, Marxist, Leninist, communists or whatever. Not that I am one of those, but they'll say, like, you want to, or if you're like someone sympathetic to that outside of, countries that are under those kind of parties, there's sometimes people say, oh, I just want to move there so I don't have to deal with capitalism anymore. But of course, our material conditions around us and our fellow people around us are those we know best and those we can work best with and those we should be influencing rather than trying to escape to some kind of periphery. And so similarly speaking, that same battle is fought with my fellow Americans and not any random Palestinian or Israeli citizen. That's sort of beyond the purview of anything less than idealism.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of ignores the fact that there's a lot of cleavage within Palestine as well. There's you've got like secular activists alongside Hamas. You've got people accusing refugees who decided to make a life for themselves outside and accusing them of tatbiyah, which is like Arabic for normalization, which is like, I don't know, what were they supposed to do, and I think that's why it's like, I think pulling people around a very like saleable thing is kind of necessary. Even when I haven't read that much about one state solution proposals or like theory and all that. I've read a few of them say, I think it was like either from Ilan Pape or was it Ramsey? I can't remember his name. Talking about basically like you can suggest a one state solution that doesn't actually that doesn't negate Israel's right to exist. Like, well, how does that happen? And the idea is basically kind of like almost like a federal system. So yeah, but then you just go into these like enormous like documents, and I'm just like, it's really difficult to understand. And whereas most people, even people who do activism, don't know much beyond like a few talking points here and there. So it's either I'm going to try to explain this to like a random person or like even like an activist at university or something like that, or I'm going to be like, yeah, there's an occupation. It's really fucked. It's like apartheid and shit. We should stop them doing that. Yeah.
Yeah,
It's
I
harder
mean,
to
I'll be
accuse you of
honest.
like anti-Semitism when you behave like that as well. You know. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, well, yeah. As far as personally taking, I won't claim to have much more than some relatively baseline talking points as far as the Israel-Palestine situation goes. But where I mean, I don't think she is somewhat of a public figure, Linda Sarsour.
Mhm.
I heard in a talk with her that she, in the simplest terms possible, said, we're looking for a one-state solution that isn't called Israel. And so, I mean, a federalist system where it's still called Israel, I mean, maybe that would also include the right of return for Palestinians, which would be a step forward. But yeah, I mean, really all I can do in my ignorance is, take my best guess at these advocates that I admire and uh, trust to some degree,
Mhm.
and y- you know, try to advocate their positions without making them become something else.
Yeah. Yeah. Because well, I mean the federalist thing is a bit. Yeah. It's actually not that. As far as I remember, I don't think it's that different to what Sorcerer was saying, but like, yeah, it's like I find it very difficult to like, take like a very extensive interest in that. Although like that is going to be I think it's going to be the most likely thing is that like even Abbas of all people is like basically saying that it's going to be one state solution like as their proposal rather than two state because of how far it's gone. Um, but yeah, that's just like, I mean, I think from the West is like I don't really know where we disagree
Well,
that much to be honest. Like,
well,
you can
how about
go somewhere.
yeah? How about so you brought up Hamas, right?
Mm.
Maybe.
Yeah.
There's a few different parties over in Palestine that, as far as I'm aware, have been democratically elected,
Mm.
but they are categorized as terrorist organizations by the U.S. among others, and so
Mm.
that would maybe be something that isn't just so much. Not that I'm here to reform terrorist parties, but if they're democratically elected, I'm not sure what our country has to do. I mean, I suppose they have their reasons, but of course, I wouldn't want any party being illegalized by foreign interference in Israel Palestine. And so if these even more radical parties by our standards somehow realize that the can somehow agree with also the I don't know, somehow work with the other people in the region, obviously the more extreme Palestinians somehow working with the more extreme Israelis, you know if that's how the democratic process goes down, I'm down with that. But unfortunately, my country has basically declared these parties illegal, and
Mm.
so that's another thing that's more, um,
I mean,
yeah.
you can be a democratically elected and still be a terrorist party.
Sure,
I would call
yeah,
the state of Israel pretty terrorist, yeah, or United States sometimes, depending on what part of the world they're in. Yeah, that's still possible. But
yeah.
I mean, like even Hamas, I mean, like I'm not like I'm not like a hawk. I can understand why like people vote for Hamas. Like it's not just because they want rockets to get fired. It's also because um, the PA or like PLO or like Fatahs are like
Mm,
so strongly associated with like corruption and failure. Like I think Abbas is like more wealthy than Netanyahu, which is really funny.
mhm.
But Hamas, on the other hand, like as well as shooting rockets, is they actually do like they do distributive policies and they handle like as much as they can, people's like welfare and shit like that. And for given the resources they have, is kind of impressive. So, like yeah, like I can understand why, and of course, obviously, just the fact that like what Gaza does to people living there, I'm not really gonna like, go up to them and be like, "Come on, Habibi, behave yourselves." Like, no, they have good reasons for wanting to support Hamas, even though I don't think Hamas is particularly helpful. Um,
Mm.
um, yeah,
I mean,
it's
I
like,
think, would you like to move on to another topic? I mean, I think more or less, we can.
Need something?
I Yeah, I mean, unless you have anything further you want to say on this.
I'm just imagining if any Zionists watching would want to clip that last minute out of context, but go ahead. Whatever. Yeah, you can go
Blame
somewhere
it
else if
on
you want.
me.
Go for
Yeah.
it.
Would you? Okay, sorry. I said that and then I have something immediate. Let me bring up my notes. Um, I did watch your video on racism in the UK.
Mm.
And there was a couple quotes out of that I wrote down. Would you mind if we talk about those?
It's been a while, but go ahead.
Yeah. So the first one that stuck out to me was you're familiar with Jane Elliott. I mean, you brought her up. Her exercise about the separating students or people in blue eyes and brown eyes. And then one day she says the brown eyes are superior and they're mean to the other ones. And the next day the blue eye. Yeah. So I'll just read the quote. I wrote it down and I think, so Jane Elliott's exercise to teach her children the day after Martin Luther King Jr.'s assassination, on if the white children wanted to know what it was like to be black. So the first day, the brown eyes were treated superior to the blue eyes. And the next day, the roles were reversed. It was found that the blue-eyed kids who suffered marginalization the day before were more kind and less cruel when they were in the position of superiority. So I added a few words there, but that's more or less your position, right?
Sure.
So yeah, do you think this principle would track with the general idea of if the oppressed got the power that the oppressors once had and even had the opportunity to use it against them, that they would somehow be more kind and less cruel?
I don't know. So the problem there is Jane Elliott was cited by academics. That's a really interesting question. Jane Elliott was cited by academics a little bit. I think there was some kind of there was replicated in more controlled environments and it seemed to produce similar results. I don't really know how you can apply that to people who have every other person in Palestine's lost someone in one of the intifadas or one of the bombings or fucking to white phosphorus and all that. I don't really know if it can carry on exactly the same way, but I don't know. Historically, I think one of the ways that that Mandela and the ANC managed to end apartheid relatively peacefully, the way that transition happened was could have been a lot more violent. But I think part of that was, the fact that they enshrined existing property rights so that there was no fear of massive retribution. The ANC at length apologized for all the civilian deaths, and I think they blamed it on bad training and kind of insisted that it was never part of their plan. So I don't know if that study in general is a good marker, but historically you can see that, it can go that way. But then I guess, I don't know, I feel am I right that the Rwandan genocide between the Tutsis and the Hutus?
The Tutsis and the Hutus.
Was that I don't know. I feel like there was a bit of vengeance in that. If my memory serves, it might be wrong, but I don't know. I think it just that's why I feel that's why I always struggle with people who advocate for or just seem so blasé about the idea of more aggressive more aggressive handovers of power or reconciliation, but I'm all for when Mandela did that speech right after apartheid ended about reconciliation, peace, nation building. I don't think he was being a bitch boy sellout, which some people called him, but I think it was actually quite a good thing. Because otherwise I think I don't know. I feel ending apartheid would have been a lot more bloody if that wasn't kind of what they were going for.
Well, as far as the accomplishments of Mandela, I won't say I've accomplished even a fraction of that. But now us being or I say us, now the world being 30 years post-apartheid, the Economic Freedom Fighters Party has advocated a position for land expropriation without compensation, which sort of goes against the idea of I think you mentioned property rights being maintained. And so this is sort of another position further than that. Do you think that's very tenable nowadays?
I don't think it's impossible. I think it failed. So it failed last year, didn't it? It failed to get 60% of the vote. that they needed.
Oh, I didn't know it went to a vote. Oh, okay.
I think it went to a vote. Yeah, I mean, it looks really popular. I can understand why, because like I think Mandela wanted to transfer like 30% of the land within 5 years, and by the most generous estimates, it's been like 20% at most, and probably less. So yeah, I can see why they want it. My problem, I think, as far as I know, the EFF want the expropriation from the land away from, I guess it's mostly Boer farmers, towards the state, isn't it? They want the state to take it.
That's what I've heard. Yeah, it's mostly farmland, stuff like that.
Yeah, I don't know. Like I'm in that position, you know. Like I can't really I can't really impugn South Africans for their anger and their frustration and kind of like leaning towards into that. But from standing from the outside, that seems like a pretty bad idea. Like if you forcibly expropriate like people for a country that like depends quite a lot on foreign investment. I think it's like almost a quarter of GDP last year was foreign investment in South Africa. So yeah, and that would not last if you were forcibly expropriating people. And I don't know much about the details, but I have read that like, yeah, I don't know. I'll leave it and maybe come back to the rest. But yeah, I don't think it's a great idea.
Well, presumably speaking, it's not expropriating the people. It's just their lands. Like they would still have land to live on. It's just these big homes. I'm not sure how I'm not sure how the the private property crumbled over there, but yeah, I mean it's hard to say. I'm a fan of Malema. I think he's a charismatic speaker. And I think the Economic Freedom Fighters Party is quite inspiring, personally. But again, I'm in a similar level of ignorance with South Africa as with basically all foreign policy.
Well, I don't expect. I don't know, being a bit optimistic here, but I do kind of wish that. I can see why it's happened. Like this policy is big. Like I can't see it being helpful because like that like alone, even not even on moral terms and all that, but like just on a very pragmatic, like you're kind of going to have to accept that South Africa is going to be cutting itself off from the rest of the world, like, or at least from a lot of the world if they decide to do that. All the same, I feel like the reason that's kind of happened is maybe I feel like I don't really know why they've come to this idea that the Constitution as it is now is incapable of redistributing wealth or of like balancing the economy a little bit better. Because for one, I think you could blame a lot of that like lack of speed with the ANC is just because of corruption, right? Like they're all like I think some of the leaders are worth like $500 million or something. Like it's insane. So that like just lack of political will has been like really, really bad. And I think the other thing is that I don't even know if farmland is, because that seems to be what it's focused on. Like rural land is that even the majority of the problem? Because I thought like a lot of South Africa's kind of like benefits of colonialism were centralized in the cities. Because I thought Boers, despite being beneficiaries of colonialism, were not like the top beneficiaries. They were genocided like over 100 years ago, and then they were pretty economically stratified up until the end of apartheid. They probably still are a little bit. Like, yeah, I don't know. It's,
yeah, I mean, personally, yeah. Personally speaking, as far as this rural lands, relatively sparsely populated areas, and maybe the economic, as far as that goes, obviously we shouldn't just take their land and give it to an indigenous person. That land should be nationalized, in my opinion. And the Economic Freedom Fighters Party, I think they are maybe they like nationalizing resources rather, but I'm not so sure. I do see people in your chat though. They're asking me who you're talking to. Have we gotten far enough for me to throw out my name to expose myself? And okay. So, anyways, I go by Noble Savage most recently, but my YouTube channel is Pretendian Analysis. That's really hard to say and really hard to read. So that's who I am. I'm just an American who's white and also a citizen of a Native American federally recognized tribe, and a streamer.
Cool. So,
Um,
were you? What was I? Was I supposed to respond to something there? Yeah.
Hello.
No, like
Safe travels.
I don't know. Like I'm not like. I mean, it wasn't until like I'm in my 30s now. Like when I was in my early 20s, I was a very big like expropriate the landlords kind of person. You know, then you start to realize, well, like
Can I help you?
I'm talking about European countries. Then you realize like, oh, actually quite a lot of landlords don't really earn that much more than their tenants. Is that really like reasonable? And then, you know, foreign investment is a big thing. People are not going to invest in a country that's expropriating landlords. Then, you know, just pull it back. And like, I'm still okay with expropriating like the monarchy. I think that would be funny. But
yeah.
as far as I know, for like, it's going to be a really weak comparison because Scotland is nothing like South Africa. But what we've done here is like, we have a big problem with land in Scotland because so much of it is owned by just leftovers of the old aristocracy. They just inherit this land down generations and do fuck all with it. Like they have a big forest to walk through and no one else is allowed in it and shit. And we've kind of got a policy here, which is just that like you have to cross a certain threshold of public benefit with your land. And if you don't, you're going to get forced to sell it, which is compensatory and it's also pretty pragmatically justified. And it's not, that's the kind of thing that might even attract investors because if they know that the land of the country is being used usefully, yeah, you might even get more, depending on how you feel about foreign investment. But yeah, I don't know. Like, I think within South Africa's constitution, they could do that without like the potential, like, let's face it, like violence that could go with, like expropriating without compensation. I don't know. I kind of wish they had a bit more. There was a bit more political will to try and pursue that, but you know, at this rate, I don't know. I guess we'll see if that expropriation goes to a vote again, or what. I think the EFF are at what, like 6% of the vote now, nationally.
Yeah, I have no idea. I just know that Malema keeps telling people he's going to be president one day, and I believe him.
Nice. Well, you know. Keep that optimism going, you know, the world needs it. Now, like, are you morally okay with that then? Just like, is there a threshold? Is there a certain amount of wealth these farmers need to have before they can be expropriated? I think you said it shouldn't extend to their homes. What's your moral stance on it?
So my moral stance, I was going to say more materialistically, but morally speaking, you know, maybe what comes to mind is, I forget her exact name, but that video from the Black Lives Matter protests where a woman was saying, you know, we don't own any of this. As far as I'm concerned, they can burn this to the ground. And they're lucky. We want equality and not revenge. You know, obviously, I don't think a majority population, like, that statement is much different in the in the United States than rather South Africa. But morally speaking, yeah, I mean, I think people are entitled to have a place to live. You know, maybe even a modest yard. But any kind of massive empty lands that are under private ownership, I think is, you know, should be nationalized for the trust of the entire citizenry.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know nearly enough details to say I think it's a bad idea, but apart from a couple of things I've already cited, so yeah, I don't know. I don't really see like any huge disagreements.
Yeah,
Anything
I mean,
else
I
you
guess
wanted to tap at me for?
But okay, so do you think, say, the oppressed in South Africa, which are admittedly the majority population, wanted to and had the ability to take revenge on the minority population? I guess what I'm trying to say, can someone be genocidal for advocating for Black South Africans somehow against the white South Africans?
Can someone be genocidal? Yeah, I think they potentially. Yeah, I think the kind of crux I get, not the crux, the contradiction I sometimes hear is people will say that, kind of two things. Maybe start with the first one. The first one I hear is that they'll say that colonized people have a right to live free of their colonizers. You ever heard that phrase before?
Yeah, or like they have a right to be free of their oppressors. Maybe
Yeah.
like a sort of permanent safe space or something.
Yeah, and the oppressors or the colonizers in the case of South Africa would be anyone who's white, basically. Like if you're Dutch or if you're living on stolen land. Yeah, so if you're Dutch or like British descended, then yeah, you're probably a colonizer. So that makes me wonder, what if you get into a situation where colonized people want to live free of their colonizers, but the colonizers don't want to leave? Yeah, that is kind of leaving the door open for genocide. Like, I don't think it's going to happen because I know that most serious advocates for this just will say, no, that's off the table. Like, come on, you're oppressed. That doesn't give you the right to fucking kill people en masse. Yeah, but just it's kind of irritating when I hear people with that rhetoric online. And I think they maybe, if I want to be really charitable, they don't want to feel like they're telling oppressed people what to do. But actually, it should be okay to say that oppressed people don't have the right to commit genocide, or ethnic cleansing even. Because, lots of white people in South Africa live on stolen land. Yeah. I don't think that justifies throwing them off, you know?
Yeah, I mean, ideally speaking, every country would eventually become, a multicultural, open country to whoever people need, and the country also needs. I would love to see a time where America is not unique in taking so many international peoples, and that, that's more standard policy for countries. But obviously, these divides exist, and these majority and visible minority populations exist. But yeah, so it's South Africa. Sorry, I'm trying to stay focused. I've heard, I didn't have time to track down the clip, but there's an American YouTuber, and he actually said something along the lines of one of Mandela's biggest mistakes was not, with the British granting independence to South Africa, was not making a policy to return some of these Dutch settlers. And I don't know, would you think that's just generally a genocidal position to say that Dutch settlers should return to the Netherlands?
Kind of like an ethnic cleansing policy. I mean, it depends, because if you're trying to enact, like, I don't know how many Dutch settlers there are, but as far as white settlers, you got it's like 6 or 7 million of them, right? The thought of removing those people is like, how like, I hate to make the comparison, but you know how like Nazi Germany wasn't originally a genocidal project, it was a remove them project, and then obviously you realize that removing millions of people en masse is kind of fucking difficult, so you just kill them instead. It's very simplified, but yeah, I mean, yeah, I might say, like, it's not so much that it's genocidal, it's just that it leaves a door open for genocide, and it's just like, it's so unnecessary. Like, if there was any hint that Mandela was going to deport a bunch of white South Africans, you think they would have gotten rid of their nukes? You think they would have like given up as easily as they did? Probably not. Like, and if we apply that to Israel, a much more heavily armed country, then it's no, I'm not a fan of it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not necessarily a fan. Like, so I've been, anyways, I have some sympathy and see the obvious problem with the idea that people who are born in a place somehow live on stolen land. Like, for example, people say America is a country of immigrants, but those so-called immigrants are native born.
Yeah.
But they still, within the melting pot, like, they're still recognized as having immigrated. And then this is used to, say, well, how are they going to be nativistic when, they themselves immigrated somewhere in history? And so I get all that. That being said, another issue that comes up, specifically South Africa or maybe any other colonized place, is that obviously the colonizers have married, to put it kindly,
Mhm.
with the locals. And obviously, you can't separate the colonizers and the colonized if they themselves are both, you know.
Yeah.
Um, if we're gonna separate it to like this group of people and that group of people. So yeah, obviously, I'm not like a fan of like, uh, again, like I'm not saying like any white South African should be deported or anything. Um,
Do you
but I
think
am.
colonizer and
Mm,
colonized? There's kind of a problem with the language there, right? Because the Afrikaners who originally went into South Africa were colonizers. The original British people who went into South Africa were colonizers. They saw themselves that way. They were proudly calling themselves settler colonialists. They went there with guns, and they like any local who resisted by killing them. It was completely justified because they were
mm,
colonizers. Whereas when you call the
yeah.
descendant of a descendant of a descendant of a colonizer still a colonizer, then it's like when you're using that language of a colonizer, like I would say that if someone like what I would describe as a colonizer was the Afrikaners and the British and like the original people who went there with guns and took it over. And it's okay. It's actually okay to kill colonizers. Like, whereas when you call people who are there
Mm.
today colonizers, like, like to my moral system, you're kind of like saying they're fair game. And I don't really know if it's the most useful. I don't really know what you gain from that label, to be honest.
Yeah, in my opinion and experience, it's not the people who are descendants of colonizers who continue to colonize. It's the state.
Hmm.
It's the education system. I did learn English from, my white dad or whatever, and also, my native mom. But it's not the people who are colonizing. It's the system that remains in place. So
Hmm.
I would even argue that, being a heavily colonized native or whatever, I live a settler lifestyle. I am, in some ways, a colonial. Just personally speaking, I've practiced the right of return for moving from somewhere in the U.S. to another place. So far be it for me to say that, one person's place is here because they are this and the other.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, I mean, obviously it's the state that colonizes and not the current descendants of colonizers. Although, I mean, there's a lot of social pruning and a lot of like authoritarianism that goes in polite society, and that's sort of
Hmm.
skewed towards, I would argue, the white population in a lot of cases. But that's not them personally necessarily. It's I would say it's the state that colonizes, not the people.
Yeah, and you can say all that and still recognize a lot of the people who live there for like what that state does to them is that like I don't know if you've ever spoken to like a like if you ever heard like a white South African talk about politics or like seen any of those interviews with like just an average like Israeli talking about politics, like oh god, like settler mentality is like fucking brain cancer. Like they have the most, like disgusting opinions. uh you but yeah, I calling them colonizers is just like there have been times where colonizers like where like settlers have been like forcibly removed in like kind of extreme cases like when the Soviets pushed back into Poland, the Nazi like the German settlers there had to leave. A lot of them were forced out. Like talking
Mm.
about 4 years after the invasion happened, so maybe it's a bit more recent. But yeah, like I don't know, I feel like I don't think it's hard to be consistent with that position though. Like I would even say like as much as I think Crimea should go back to Ukraine, I don't really know if I fancy evicting the 250,000 settlers because they are Russian settlers who moved there since 2014, and a lot of them have moved into land that was fled by locals because they, especially Tatars. Yeah,
Mm.
like I just that rhetoric of like maybe just colonizer and colonized just kind of opens a lot of doors that it shouldn't, or just maybe it's like one of those things that's like the advocacy outside of the internet is actually pretty decent, but what you see online is like fucking idiots. I don't know.
Well, people's feelings get really invested in whether they're called, someone living on stolen land, or whether they're said to be someone who was kicked off of land that was stolen from them.
Mm.
So it's a lot of feelings. I mean, what came to mind while you were speaking is like, if you know the streamer Heem, he said, when I hear indigenous people say land back and that I live on stolen land, as an immigrant, I feel unwelcome. And I don't like that statement too much, but I do understand the question of, okay, so the original people who came to America were colonizers, and they also more or less immigrated here. So the people who continue to immigrate here, are they themselves too colonizers?
Yeah.
Or are they merely immigrants? And so obviously, if I just think the state colonizes, then like they're just immigrants. They aren't colonized. They're not coming here to establish their own state. The state is there, you know.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, because, well, when you get to that, we all live on stolen land, or just about. Like, I could definitely trace, it wouldn't be hard for me to trace that I live on land that was stolen from Gales, like, not even that long ago, like 1850s, you know? Yeah. But, I don't know, maybe just recognizing that everyone does is maybe makes that a bit easier. And another good question would be then, you know, like, would you say that, like, let's say it's more recent. Let's say a Mizrahi Jew from the Middle East, whose family have been in the Middle East for hundreds of years, maybe even thousands, finds themselves living on a bit of land that was stolen from Palestinians in the '67 war. Like, are they colonizers? Like, and you know, or even further, even more, you get like Jews who were kicked out of East Jerusalem in the '48 war, like basically an ethnic cleansing, by the Jordanians. Were the Palestinians refugees who ended up moving to East Jerusalem afterwards because they were kicked out of somewhere else? Did they become colonizers?
I
don't
remember
know.
this
You know,
hypothetical
yeah.
coming up. It's hard to say, you know, it's like if I can, I mean, if you really need an answer to that, I can, but if I could just go off of this 1 second. There's that Stone Toss comic where it's a native or no, it's a Confederate a guy with a rebel flag on. He says, "Go back to where you came from." And then a native guy comes up behind him. "Sure, when are you going back?"
Yep.
Stabs him in the back.
Yep.
Then another native comes up. "When are you going back?" And then so this leads us to say, well, natives are living on stolen land. So what right have they to say we live on stolen land? And maybe there's a conversation to be had there, but that's a pretty partisan position to take, in my opinion.
Well, this is why I mentioned this in our DMs, is that a lot of people don't like to hear this. Far right people and like white genocide theorists and all these fucking assholes, they don't get their opinions like out of thin air. When someone is like, "Oh, I'm really like afraid, like there's, you know, the whites are being genocided," and then they maybe go on Twitter and they say that, and they get like 500 responses saying, "Yeah, fuck yeah, we are genociding you, fuck," like it's like they kind of. Then they start to wonder, like, "Oh, wow, there's actually some like genocidal intent here," you know. And like they shouldn't be running with that, but like, you know, people who are quite uninformed and are quite stupid and quite vulnerable, like that's what they'll use. And that's why, like, the thing with South Africa with the expropriation thing, even though it never happened, the far right in America loved it because they hijacked the shit out of it and said that, oh, look, like, basically like all this critical race theory and oppressor and oppress and all that is going to result in all the land, like farms being stolen in South Africa, like because of the racial revenge and all that shit. Even before anything had happened, they were making that stuff. I don't want to say that people are giving the far right like ammunition, because chances are they'll make it up anyway. But as far as what you can do as an individual is like not so much how you influence the far right, but like someone in the middle, you know, someone who's a bit uninitiated and all that. Like I'd prefer to talk to them in a way that doesn't like scare them off. And it's very easy to scare someone off when you
See you later.
use like, you know, certain rhetoric, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, if you say, you know, every American in the U.S. is living, or every white American in the U.S. is living on stolen land, you get a lot of people who haven't thought the first thing about any of those words, you know, and they obviously off the bat feel implicated in some kind of injustice they are completely unaware of. And so,
by the way, I should just
Sorry.
say I don't think people like him are like, I don't think him being afraid of like feeling not welcome because of the stolen land thing, I don't think that's necessarily justified if he had heard if he had heard what like land back activists and authors and like advocates for any of these things, any of those people, like if he had just like heard it from like something from them, like I don't think he would have felt unwelcome, right? Because, but yeah, I think I think there are people online who do make that fear slightly warranted, or not fear, but just like, I don't know, it just feels kind of weird. It's just like, it just sounds kind of like threatening, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I know he did have a conversation with the serfs, and I won't give my opinion on the serfs, but you know, they did have a more productive conversation on land back and those kinds of ideas.
Hello. How are you? See you around.
But as far as people, you know, say having such like doing the meme, like actually advocating white genocide.
What can I do for you? Farewell.
What comes to mind for me, so if we can expound that to the white replacement
Can I
theory,
help you?
merely
Well
miscegenation
met.
becomes a means for white genocide to occur.
Yeah.
You know, like me as a white passing native person, the average white person is more comfortable with me just saying I'm white than saying I'm native and white. And I think this sort of feeds in to this idea that, well, somehow whites are being genocided because, you know, people are both whites and not whites, you know. And so if I'm incredulous, if I'm irreverent in saying, oh, I want to nuke all white suburbs, please don't ban me, Twitch. But if I say I wanted to, I don't want to do that in a video game or in a football game. But like merely me being mixed race itself is progresses white genocide in the eyes of some who believe in this replacement theory nonsense.
Yeah, there's a difference there though, because like obviously like actual white genocide theorists do believe that miscegenation is enough, like which is ironic because that would also mean that black people are getting genocided as well by the same token. But
well,
like
yeah,
because they're becoming mixed races, or like well, I guess they don't become seen as mixed
but
race.
I've heard people say that like even, you know, there's a lot of black people who are like mixed race and they're just considered black. You know, they'll just say they're white skinned instead of like mixed race.
Not by like racists though. Racists tend to actually make the distinction because they are obsessed with race. You know, they'll say Obama's not black, he's mixed race. Yeah, that's why like a white genocide. At least
if they're aware, yeah. But a lot of people I think just pass as black, even though they're very much more, or not more, but there are other things as well. You know.
Yeah. So the thing I was wanting to mention there is that I do agree that like worrying about white ethnic cleansing in whatever part of the world, or like being called a colonizer because you live on land that was stolen 200 years ago by Americans and all. I think, of course, that fear is like very unwarranted. The problem is it becomes less of a theory. I wouldn't call it white genocide. I would call it like, I don't know, retribution theory or whatever. Like what was I going to say? Fuck. It doesn't really become a theory when the person you're talking to says, well, yeah, land's not yours, mate. Yeah. You know what I mean? And I don't really, if you did that whole, like, whatever joke about nuking white suburbs and all that, like, is the idea there that, like, it shouldn't be taken, like, seriously because it's just, like, it's so, like, impossible to happen, or because you pose no physical threat by saying that, or what were you getting to there?
I guess there's a few levels of irony and separation that I'm operating under.
Yeah.
But maybe the most justifiable one is if white people, as they have historically, segregate themselves into exclusive communities. You know, that sort of presents that sets the field for this kind of actual separation between our groups of people if they're imposing it in that way. Whereas if people aren't, you know, white flighting to the suburbs, if people aren't creating exclusive white communities, then that separation between our people is not so prominent that they can actually become all white targets over huge, you know, portions of land because they've established those exclusive communities. I don't know. I guess
I don't really know where you're going with
maybe.
that, but like, yeah. Typically I like to think about it like if someone is being like if someone who's got that decolonization line or whatever and they are being very like verbally aggressive towards like white people and or Israelis or white South Africans, then I'm not really going to judge them based on how feasible it is that they can carry out that threat, because we can't do that. Like, we're just streamers, like, because then I'd be letting fucking like Nick Fuentes off the hook, you know, because he never actually advocates to deport all the immigrants, you know, but obviously that's what he wants. And I have to kind of make logical inferences from what he's saying. And although it's very unlikely he's going to be able to action that anytime soon, I should still, I can only treat someone as an advocate. So I can judge them on what they say. I can't judge them on what they're going to potentially do. So yeah, I think people are fair game if they want to behave like that. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think anyone's statements. I mean, they should be taken at face value if they're to be criticized, and if they're to be understood. You know, maybe you talk through it and figure out exactly what they're meant to mean. So yeah, I mean, it's you know, I wouldn't say it's anything more than shit posting when people get on that white genocide nonsense, but. It's not shit posting from the other side when people do say, "Oh, we're being threatened by these people diluting our culture and diluting this and that." They're sincere on the other side, and they're not just shit posting.
Not always. Quite a lot of shit posting happens though, and I imagine you might. Do you know what Poe's law is?
I've heard of it.
So
Google it.
In my private life, when I'm with partners or people I trust, I like misogynistic humor. It's funny. I did it like once or twice on stream, and the incels just came out of nowhere. The problem is that what you joke about on the internet. Remember, the internet's full of crazy people, right? You can joke about white genocide and like stuff like. You can joke about white genocide as in like I want to do it. Like you can joke about that online all you want, but yeah, you're eventually going to gather a few people who are not joking about that either. And personally, like I don't know, I just don't like being around those people. Like I don't like that. I don't like having a community that thinks like that. Regardless of how real life threatening it really is.
Yeah, I mean, if everyone's just circle jerking, like post ironic jokes and just being like, just enjoying being hateful to these like
something? See you around.
Yeah, I understand. There's definitely a more positive position to take without getting in so many levels of like irony and resentment at what's been done, but yeah, it's. I don't know. I still find it hard to believe. Like, I don't know. I guess we'll see with this white replacement stuff. If I mean, you know, people. Well, I mean, there are a few examples people bring up of like supposed actual examples of white genocide. Like, people bring up like some things that happened immediately after the Haitian Revolution. I've seen a thing called the San Diego Plan, which was apparently to like make an all POC, no white state in the United States, and they were gonna literally like kill like the whites like over age of 10 or something. Yeah, I mean, you can Google it. It's like kind of obscure. I don't know how reliable it is, but you can Google San Diego Plan. It's kind of, they check the boxes, all right, with this kind of stuff, and so yeah, I mean these, or even the Oran massacre in Algeria. I mean, that was another sort of isolated event that could be taken as an example of this like white ethnic cleansing. And so, I mean, yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's a really tough conversation.
It's also just like what your goal is, you know. Like I despise the thought of me being so ironic and so incredulous that no one understands what my positions are. Like, if I feel like I've memed myself or like even just misspoken my real position into making people believe something else, like I'll try to correct that like as much as possible, like, you know. And yeah, I really, I feel like honestly, when people get to a point where they're just like I don't know, maybe they're so sick of being asked if they're like genocidal or if they want ethnic cleansing, all that, that they just that they just kind of relish in the fact that people are confused about their positions, as if like these idiots should know better. I'm just gonna like make it worse for them. Then at that point, you've kind of given up. Like you've given up on what you were here to do, which is I'd imagine most people come on here to talk about politics because they want to convince people that their political positions are the right ones. Like, and yeah, if you're just gonna like hide behind this like veil of like irony and shit posting, then you kind of come off to me as someone who's just like a bit defeated, like as if you've given up on trying to convince people of your actual positions. So you just kind of play with like people who might just seen you for the first time and all that, might just be curious, and then they write you off because you're speaking shit. Like,
Yeah, I mean, irony, I think, is somewhat of a defense mechanism.
Yeah.
It takes something else to defend it from. So making more honest prime in the sense of like prime numbers statements rather than just being like, rather than, doing the crying, coping face with a smile to something that you didn't say. I don't know. I mean, I mean... I don't know if you're referencing anything I've said specifically, but yeah, I mean, if someone's getting to the level of irony, they're probably just like trying to have fun in some kind of defensive way.
Yeah, well, no, if I'm addressing you, I'll do it directly. Okay, don't worry.
Okay.
Is there anything else you wanted to talk about?
Yeah, we've talked a little bit long now. I mean, unless there's any other topics you want to bring up, I'm good. Thanks for having me on, though.
That's okay. Listen, if you schizo post about me on Twitter again, I'm gonna drag you right back in here to justify yourself. Okay? Like, I don't know. Like, obviously I didn't owe you this conversation, or I could have just behaved like a total asshole as soon as you came in. Do you like want to be a content creator? Do you want to be like a streamer? You want to like, you want an audience? Is that what you're kind of here for, or is this like a part-time thing while you study, or what? What's going on? What's your story?
So I like, well, okay, so the only reason I stream is because I'm too lazy to make video essays more than once a year.
Okay.
Because I've only made one and it's been already over a year. But as far as streaming goes, I came on here to try to correct some of the discourse going on with land back, principally. There's a lot of this land back equals woke ethno-state stuff like 2 years ago. Now it's like the proletarian patriots, as they call themselves, talking shit about land back, and
yeah,
and people from time to time. I mean, Lauren Southern's on memes of like, "Where's the bodies?" And other people, they mention indigenous stuff too, and so that was my principal reason for coming on. But yeah, I mean, as far as like being a content creator, yeah, I mean, I'm trying to give a voice, or like provide my voice and commentary to when these kinds of topics of land back, or be it MMIW or these other mainstream issues come to light and they're commented on by the Twitch sphere. I'm trying to provide my voice to that as well. But yeah, if I start shit posting too, I don't know what, maybe something will come up that I start getting like triggered at, but I feel like.
See what you just said right there, though. Like, it's not really shit posting if it's something I said that triggered you, is it? Like, it's kind of sincere.
Oh yeah, I mean, my defense of my problem with someone being called genocidal with like a South Africa hypothetical that was started by Vosh and being taken up by a lot of people other than him, I'm completely sincere in that. Similarly, I mean, I know this is kind of out of nowhere, but with Cat Black, she made that tweet about white dick, and then there's like 5 content creators who insisted upon saying, oh, what if Vosh had said, BP and, not British Petroleum? And it's like, Cat Black is, well, I don't need to go into that, but, needless to say, she's a trans woman. She doesn't even have BP. So why are you talking about her saying BP to Vosh, or like Vosh saying BP to her? Like, sorry, this is out of nowhere, but
it is out of nowhere. Just
but this is to say,
without going too far into it. Okay, I think it's a really simple question that can probably be answered. is
Yeah.
I agree that, let's say Vosh said word for word what Kat said, right? Let's just say it was complete role reverse, right?
Yeah.
As in, she said, "Oh, you probably just sexted me because you're, I don't know, quasi-racist and you're a chaser or whatever." And then Vosh responded with the dick joke to Kat.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like if that happened then, we would know exactly what it was. Like, one was a pretty generalized, like, still shitty statement. The other was directly speaking about someone's genitals. Like, okay, but I could still say that obviously if Vosh had done that comment the other way around, it would have been a lot more harmful because black trans women are more marginalized than Vosh is. What I don't think is, I wonder if you think this, is do you think being a black trans woman gives you more leeway to sexually harass people? Like, does the threshold for what becomes sexual harassment change by virtue of you being a black trans woman?
Yeah, see, I don't think that, but I think to have the opposite position you must, because to say that, oh, it would be so much worse if Kat Black said this is to say that they do, or no, I mean, so much worse if Vosh said that about her. That's to say that Vosh, or she does have some protections that somehow Vosh would not have.
Yeah.
If they were to make equivalent statements.
It'd be worse if Vosh said it because it would cause more harm, probably. Like, but they would still
Well, it
both
would
be
cause more
sexual.
harm.
But they would still both
People
be
were saying
sexual
he would
harassment.
Yeah, but people were saying he'd be raked over the coals, and he was the first one to actually say the BP stuff. He just said it on stream and not in a tweet.
Well, it's not that he
about
said
Kat
the
Black.
it's not that he said the BP thing. It's that he didn't like he spoke about her generally, and I admit it was a shitty way, but he didn't actually describe her genitals on stream. I think that's where the problem comes in. Like,
I mean, he did comment on her chest and said, you know, I like big titties or something, and
Yeah,
so
which
he was
you-
nice about it. But so if she's mean about commenting on his body, is that so much worse?
yeah, because you're again like saying big titties is like not as bad as like even to a cis woman saying big titties isn't as bad as like describing her like vagina, because you can't see, like the titties are like semi-private, like you know what they look like, especially if you wear like clothes that show people what they like, roughly what they look like. Yeah, I don't know, I don't think that's comparable. I think like
Yeah, I
the
mean,
bits that you hide from the public are hidden for a good reason, at least as far as social contracts go and shit. Like your breasts aren't your genitals. Anyway, sorry, phone.
Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but the actual details between that conversation isn't so important to me. What's more important to me is, this taking on of this standard being set, and then 5 other people say, oh, what if Kat Black said this about Vosh? You got, sorry, I won't drop too many more names because people get triggered with that, but there's like 5 people who are prominent creators. And then similarly, when Vosh said that some people were genocidal, whether it's Mel or someone else, they say like, these tankies are genocidal. Everyone, or not everyone, but 9 out of 10 people take that up, and that's I don't think either. Like, I think Kat Black would suffer just as much blowback if she said the equivalent about Vosh, or Vosh her. I think that's more or less equal personally. And similarly, with these people who have been maligned as genocidal because they're like tankies or whatever, I'm not like, I don't think they're genocidal necessarily.
I don't even think with Mel. I don't think Mel's genocidal. The problem there was, as far as I haven't seen much of this. This is going way back now. As far as I saw from where they do this, though, is like with Mel, she was just kind of like, she just wouldn't answer the question, and she was like really like incredulous about the question, like.
Yeah,
which is, I think maybe she feels like it's a racist attack. Like you're Asian, therefore like you have more onus on you to justify like to declare your like allegiance with the Uyghur Muslims, right? Like she might feel like really pissed off by that and feel like I don't owe this person an answer. But to me, it's like you're online. You kind of do just like, and you'd make your own life easier if you just said, yeah, they're doing a genocide. It's really fucking bad. Like that's really really bad. That's kind of why I would maybe contrast that with someone like, I don't know, aristocracy. She gets a lot of shit. But if you ask her a question, she'll answer it. She'll just tell you. Even though she's been probably asked it 1 billion times. Like, I know for a fact that when she used to do like pro-Palestine activism, she's spoken about this on stream, she had people like bully her or like get like basically like shame her out of the group because she wasn't pro one-state solution, whereas they didn't do that to the non-Jewish activists. They didn't even ask the other ones. So it's like, yeah, but like even after all that, like, yeah, I mean, I'm sick of answering a lot of questions, but I'll do it, you know, because I'm not so high and mighty that I think like, you know, maybe some people are hearing me for the first time, you know, maybe not everyone has had the time to go through hours of my content to find out my positions. And if I've got the opportunity to just answer a question, why wouldn't you just do it?
I mean, as far as the Mel stuff goes, I mean, I think she basically said, well, we don't know yet. You know, we got to do, you know, wait for investigations to come in. But, you know, the U.S., a few other countries have, one might say preemptively or alternatively correctly identified this as a genocide. And to expect Mel to merely hop onto the U.S. or a handful of other countries recognizing this off the bat rather than waiting for more countries or more study of what's happening, you know, I mean, it's not like you're being super critical of her right now, but, you know, she was like, maybe not from you, but other people, they were just like, oh, she's genocidal because she doesn't say this, and saying, yeah, more, like maybe it happens, maybe it doesn't happen. Needs to be more people going to research it. I mean, I get that might just come off as dodging the question, but you know, it is only a handful of countries that have defined what's happening in Xinjiang as genocide.
Yeah, it is. But I think the problem there is that, like, so far, based on what we do know, and based on what the CCP have admitted, is like cultural genocide. I don't think is in the international definition anymore, but it definitely is that. Like, they've admitted that they're putting them in re-education camps. Like, it's what else are you going to call that?
What are you, a fucking
But
liberal?
like, yeah, I kind of agree with partly what you're saying. Like, yeah, calling someone genocidal is pretty shit, especially if you've got a really big audience and all that. I just that like I don't know if I'm going to look back at the history and see how much shit was thrown the other way, because often that gets lost in the sauce a little bit. I don't really know exactly what happened in those conversations because I only listened to them in passing or listened to clips, and I hate judging people just based on clips. Yeah, I don't know. Like, if you're saying, I mean, that's why I think if in my video with the Noah Samson thing, like I clipped out the bits where I called someone genocidal or like a genocidal maniac. I think I just missed one because the transcript didn't pick it up because I was muttering it. Yeah, but you know, it's the internet. You know, you talk shit, you get hit. Like we're all, like, if you stick around long enough, you're gonna get falsely accused of things. I know I've been. I know people. Like, everyone I know has been. Yeah,
or
like
God forbid, you know, I get an audience, you know, they could find plenty of things that are, you know, in 30 seconds are like sussy, but yeah, I don't know. I guess I'll just, if that happens, I'll cross that bridge when I get there. But, you know, I mean,
the problem is like, okay, well, let's just say, because obviously all these people aren't here, can't really speak that much to them. With you said you wanted to kind of like settle the score when it came to things like land back and like correct people and all that. Yeah. Do you think you've done you've done a better job of that here than you've ever done on Twitter?
Everything's better done off of Twitter, right? But
I think you're like I think I'm talking to a different person. Like, I think you've got an agent who is like trying to sabotage you on Twitter. Like, yeah, you've actually like, this is like the best experience I've ever had with a land back person. And I did, yeah, like, it's just very different, you know? Because I did flick through those VODs of you reacting to my debates, like with the dating panel. Like, Jesus, man. Like, you know.
Oh, wait, was there something I said there? I mean, I might have got tricked.
Something like, we're ooh-wooing about the Israeli nukes. We should give them what they want and shit. I'm like, bro, if you're trying to expropriate a population that has nukes, you're going to have to take into fact there's a few flaws with that. One being they have nukes. Like, and I'm pretty sure, I can't say it, the nukes in South Africa would have definitely been used if they were threatening to expropriate the white population, but definitely more likely. I don't know, like.
Sure, okay, obviously.
I like this Twitch you, though. I don't agree with you on everything. I don't agree with the EFF thing. I don't think, but yeah, I don't know. There's like.
Well, I'm glad you've enjoyed this conversation. I've enjoyed the conversation too. I'm glad you didn't use my, maybe exaggerating behavior off of this platform to, push this into something else. But that being said, with the nuke thing, like the U.S. I mean, I don't know if they're the biggest nuclear power, but like, how am I gonna tell someone else, oh, that country that's oppressing you has nukes, so far, like, you shouldn't resist them or do this or that because that's dangerous. When like,
Do you think? Wait. Do you think that's my position though?
Okay.
Do you think that's what I'm saying? You shouldn't resist them because they have nukes.
No, I think your position is that at a certain point you cross a threshold where like that card, the nuke card, can be like, for lack of a better term, dropped, and then you're fucked because like you've gone beyond diplomacy.
Yeah, and like, you know what's really fun? Like, because I would say, I think I've been consistent with that because I don't know if you've seen me for the last few months, like basically soying over Ukraine's resistance against Russia. Russia's got a lot of nukes, and I'm very happy with what Ukraine's doing by pushing back against an invasion. However, I also still have the stance that, like, this war will be over nice and quick if Russia just gives back Crimea and the breakaway territories in the east and fucks all its troops out. However, if it got to a point where Russia was pushed back, and what was next on the table was something like invade Crimea to take it back, then I'm probably going to be like, well, okay, this is a nuclear power. How many Ukrainians are going to die if you try to take back Crimea by force rather than through like sanctions or whatever the fuck else, Like, I don't think I feel like if I made that argument with Russia, it would be a lot more digestible because for some reason people feel like have different standards when it comes to like countries' rights to resist. But like, is there an inconsistency there, or what do you think?
So I see what you're saying. It's like, Ukraine has to be realistic, and so they can't provoke Russia a nuclear power by taking back Crimea. And similarly, Palestinian. Well, I say this. I'm conjecturing. Palestinians have to be realistic, and so shouldn't it do something similar to taking back Crimea from Israel, lest they provoke a nuclear war? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, because I feel like Crimea could be taken back through either like sanctions or maybe even like, I don't know, like in exchange for prisoners of war if they seem to have enough of them. I don't know, like not military strategists, but yeah. The only thing I'm really against there is I'm not even against pressure. I'm not even against pretty like muscling. I'm just against the concept of invading to take it back, because when it comes to, or like in case of Israel, it's like forcible evictions and shit like that. I think that's where the nuclear weapons become a bit of an obstacle. Like,
yeah, I mean, as far as yeah, I mean, it's hard for me to say. My position, me as a privileged citizen of the premier nuclear power, yeah, I'm not sure like, I mean, I guess at some point this becomes sort of the crux of the conversation. Like, can we do this without provoking nuclear war, or should we do this to avoid it? But it's really hard for me to say, just being like a citizen of someone who is of a country that is most prepared to avoid, the damages of that.
yeah. So, do you feel like saying that is kind of like, as a privileged Westerner, is like almost trying to manage the expectations of people whose expectations you shouldn't be trying to manage?
I just mean people. Yeah, I mean, I shouldn't manage the expectations of. Yeah, I mean, of Palestinians or Israelis, but I think it's when it becomes a bargaining tool, being a nuclear power against a non-nuclear power. I mean, obviously, if I could somehow convince the U.S. to flip sides, I mean, presumably they could just make Palestine a nuclear power if they became allies with someone like us, because they could just send them those. But yeah, I don't know. When it gets to nukes, it's like it almost becomes in a sort of postmodern abyss, personally speaking.
Yeah. I don't know. I have no idea how I would expect that to go, because especially like, yeah, like it's a fact of the world. Like that's the way I see it. Like as far as managing expectations, I don't think, like Ukraine should never recognize Crimea like as part of Russia. I don't think anyone should. Palestine is like very right not to recognize the state of Israel or definitely not to like recognize the Jewish state at least, because those are two different things. But yeah, it's just like the means to acquire your goal should, if you've got to consider all kinds of things, and nukes are like one of them. It's the reason we haven't put NATO troops in Ukraine to defend them against Russia, because as soon as one NATO person like gets killed by a Russian soldier, then or the other way around, then you've got nuclear war. So
Yeah.
that's why we don't do a no-fly zone in Ukraine. We did one in Libya, but not in Ukraine.
Yeah. I'll go ahead and say, sorry, I'm getting a little tired if we can wrap this up, but I'll go ahead and say, like when I say, oh, this country has nukes, shoot them and you'll be exposed for what you are. Like, obviously this is just like words. This is not actually what will happen. So yeah, I mean that if anyone goes and watches that stream, yeah, I mean that statement's a little, a little bit of that defense irony going on there.
Yeah, because like, but I mean that's the thing is like, it's just armchair general talk really. But I feel like when I bring up the nukes, it's because I feel like I'm talking to armchair generals who think it's like possible to do things that just frankly aren't. But yeah. I mean, you said you wanted to go, and I've got my panel soon, so I don't know. How do you do you feel like you've got like, what's going to happen to your approach now? Is there going to be any reflections? Any?
Look, anyone who has the DGG policy of bringing people on out of nowhere, they have my utmost respect. But everyone else, I'm going to continue being the old and noble savage that I've always been. But, yeah.
Wow. Well, I can only say it's maybe not the best idea, but, you do you. I'm not going to be your fucking content manager. Okay, well, listen, I wish you all the best. I'm going to keep watching your Twitter account, okay? Just keep a sharp eye.
All right. Thanks so much for having me on.
That's all right, son. Take care.
All right. Take care.
I think I just have no self-respect. That guy was so fucking horrible to me on Twitter, and as soon as I got into his DMs, or he got into mine, he just... it was like... so much for the tolerant left. True. Oh well. What a funny guy.